Around the same time, the first pyramids were rising in Egypt. A city on the banks of a river in South Asia was already running clean water through covered underground drains into homes built to a standardized brick size that somehow matched cities hundreds of miles away. Its people left behind thousands of carved messages, and to this day, not a single person on earth can read a single word of what they wrote. This is Mohenjo-daro. The name means mound of the dead, but that's not what the people who built it called it. We don't actually know what they called it because we can't read anything they wrote. That name was given centuries later by locals living near the ruins long after the city's builders, their language, and their identity had already disappeared into the ground. Mohenjo-daro sat completely buried and completely forgotten for roughly 3,500 years until archaeologists stumbled onto it in the 1920s and realized they were looking at one of the largest and most advanced cities of the ancient Bronze Age world, a city that, at its peak, may have held around 40,000 people, built with an obsession for planning and hygiene that puts many modern towns to shame. And then, within a couple of centuries, it was gone. Not conquered, not burned, just abandoned quietly by people whose actual names, gods, and rulers we still don't know, because the one thing that could tell us remains, after a full century of dedicated research, completely undeciphered. Let's start with what makes Mohenjo-daro remarkable in the first place, because it isn't just old, it's engineered in a way that genuinely surprised the archaeologists who found it. Mohenjo-daro was built around 2500 BCE in the region of the Indus River, in what is now Sindh province in Pakistan, as part of a much larger network of settlements belonging to what we now call the Indus Valley Civilization, sometimes referred to as the Harappan Civilization, after Harappa, a related city discovered nearby that gave the wider culture its more common name. At its height, this civilization covered an enormous geographic area, stretching across parts of modern Pakistan and northwestern India, with well over 1,000 identified sites. In terms of sheer territorial size, the Indus Valley Civilization actually covered more ground than either ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia during the same era, even though it remains far less famous than either of them today. Mohenjo-daro itself covered an area of roughly 5 square kilometers, organized with a level of deliberate urban planning that archaeologists still find striking. The city was laid out on a grid, with wide main streets running in straight lines intersected by smaller side streets at consistent right angles. The kind of systematic, planned layout you'd expect from a modern city commission, not a Bronze Age settlement built 4,500 years ago. Homes were constructed from standardized baked mud bricks, many of them multi-storied, arranged along these planned streets in a way that suggests some form of centralized coordination, or, at minimum, a widely shared and rigorously enforced building code. Here's the detail that tends to stop people cold. Those bricks weren't just similar within Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists have found that fired bricks used across different Indus Valley sites, separated by hundreds of miles, consistently follow the same ratio of length to width to height, a 4 to 2 to 1 proportion that shows up again and again across the civilization's territory. That level of standardization across such a vast area implies either direct coordination between distant settlements, or at least a widely shared set of construction standards precise enough to be followed with remarkable consistency by builders who, as far as we know, had no central written law code to enforce it, since we still can't read anything they wrote down. Then there's the water and sanitation system, which is genuinely one of the most advanced examples found anywhere in the ancient world. Mohenjo-daro had covered drains running beneath its street grid, channeling wastewater away from homes and out of the city in a coordinated system that many contemporary Bronze Age cities, including some in Mesopotamia and Egypt, simply did not match in scale or consistency. Individual homes had their own private wells and bathing areas connected to this wider drainage network, suggesting that clean water and basic sanitation weren't reserved for an elite class, but were treated as something close to a baseline standard across a large portion of the population. The most famous single structure at the site is what archaeologists now call the Great Bath, a large, carefully constructed public pool built from tightly fitted waterproofed baked brick, sealed with a layer of natural bitumen to prevent leakage. Now here's where Mohenjo-daro gets genuinely strange, compared to almost every other major Bronze Age civilization we know about. Archaeologists excavating the site have found no clear palace, no obvious temple complex dedicated to specific named deities, no grand tomb built for a named ruler, and no monumental statue or inscription glorifying any individual king, pharaoh, or emperor figure. This is deeply unusual. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and in nearly every other major early civilization, the archaeological record is full of exactly this kind of material. Rulers who wanted their names, their faces, and their achievements permanently carved into stone for the ages. Mohenjo-daro has essentially none of it. Some researchers have proposed, based on this striking absence, that Indus Valley society may have been organized in a surprisingly egalitarian, decentralized way, without the kind of god-king figure who dominated most other ancient civilizations of comparable scale and sophistication. If that's true, it raises a genuinely difficult question. How do you coordinate standardized brick ratios across hundreds of miles, maintain consistent city planning across multiple major settlements, and manage a trade network extensive enough to move materials like lapis lazuli and carnelian across enormous distances, all without the kind of centralized, personality-driven authority that every other major Bronze Age civilization seems to have relied on? Nobody has a fully satisfying answer. It's entirely possible the authority structure was real, but simply wasn't expressed through monumental self-glorification the way it was elsewhere. It's also possible we're missing something fundamental about how this society actually worked, hidden behind a script we cannot read. Let's talk about that trade network for a moment, because the physical evidence for it is remarkably concrete, even without being able to read a word of what these traders wrote to each other. Standardized stone weights, made in a consistent binary system that scales precisely from small units up to much larger ones, have been recovered across Indus Valley sites, suggesting a shared system of measurement and accounting used broadly enough to facilitate trust between merchants who may never have met each other in person. Indus Valley seals, carved with the same undeciphered script and characteristic animal imagery, have actually been found far outside the Indus Valley itself, turning up at archaeological sites in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, providing physical proof that Indus merchants, or at minimum Indus trade goods, were reaching civilizations more than 1,000 miles away. Materials like lapis lazuli, a deep blue semi-precious stone found naturally only in a small number of locations, including present-day Afghanistan, and carnelian, a reddish stone associated with Indus bead-making craftsmanship, moved through these networks in both directions, evidence of a genuinely international trade economy operating 4,000 years ago, coordinated by a civilization whose own name for itself we still don't know. The story of how Mohenjo-daro was found again after thousands of years of being completely forgotten is its own small mystery worth pausing on. In the early 1920s, an officer with the Archaeological Survey of India named R. D. Banerjee was investigating a Buddhist stupa, a much later religious monument sitting on top of what looked like an unremarkable mound near the Indus River. Banerjee began digging beneath the stupa, expecting to find more recent material. Instead, he uncovered stone tools and artifacts that appeared far older than anything connected to the Buddhist structure sitting on the surface. Further excavation revealed that the entire mound wasn't a natural hill at all. It was the buried remains of an enormous ancient city, one nobody currently living in the region had any oral memory or historical record connecting to. The city's own name, its history, and its people had been so completely erased from local memory that even the Buddhist monks who built a religious monument directly on top of its ruins, more than 1,000 years after its abandonment, appear to have had no idea what was actually buried beneath their own sacred site. And that brings us to the deepest, most frustrating mystery connected to this entire civilization. Thousands of small carved seals, tablets, and pottery fragments have been recovered from Mohenjo-daro and other Indus Valley sites, covered in a consistent system of symbols that researchers call the Indus script. It appears on seals used for trade, alongside carved images of animals like bulls, and what appear to be mythological or composite creatures. It has never been deciphered, not partially. Not through educated guesswork that most scholars accept. After more than a century of serious academic attention, involving some of the most capable linguists and archaeologists in the world, we still cannot read a single confirmed sentence of what these symbols say. Part of the problem is a total absence of anything resembling a Rosetta Stone for this civilization, no bilingual inscription pairing the Indus script with a known, readable language, the exact tool that allowed scholars to finally crack Egyptian hieroglyphics in the 19th century. Without that kind of bridge, researchers are left trying to reconstruct meaning from internal patterns alone, comparing symbol frequency, sequence, and context across thousands of short inscriptions, most of which are only a handful of symbols long, appearing on small trade seals rather than lengthy texts. There's also a deeper, more unsettling debate sitting underneath the decipherment problem. Some researchers have controversially argued that the Indus symbols may not represent a full spoken language at all, but rather a system of non-linguistic symbols, perhaps used for religious, clan, or trade identification purposes, similar to how a modern coat of arms or corporate logo conveys meaning without functioning as writing tied to spoken grammar. This theory remains genuinely disputed within the field, and plenty of specialists strongly disagree, pointing to the script's structural patterns as evidence of genuine language. But the fact that this debate even exists, a full century after the script was first discovered, says something significant on its own. We still don't know, with real certainty, whether we're looking at an unread language or a symbol system we've been trying to translate as language for the wrong reason entirely. Either way, the practical result is the same. Everything we think we know about how Mohenjo-daro's society actually functioned Its governance, its religious beliefs, the names of its people, its history, its politics, is built entirely from physical evidence and informed inference. Not one word of it comes from the people who actually lived there, in their own words, because we cannot access their own words at all. It's worth understanding just how much serious effort has gone into cracking this script, because the failure isn't for lack of trying. Since the symbols were first cataloged in the early 20th century, researchers from dozens of countries have applied nearly every tool available to historical linguistics in an attempt to break it. Statistical analysis comparing symbol frequency and sequencing patterns has been run against known writing systems from Sumerian cuneiform to early Dravidian and Indo-European language families, searching for any structural resemblance that might offer a foothold. Some researchers have proposed the script encodes an early form of a Dravidian language, related to languages still spoken in parts of southern India today, based on certain statistical patterns in how symbols cluster and repeat. Others have proposed a connection to early Indo-European, or even entirely separate, now extinct language families, with no surviving descendants at all. None of these proposals has achieved anything close to consensus acceptance, and without a bilingual text to confirm or eliminate any specific theory, the field remains genuinely, unusually split, even by the standards of ancient language decipherment, which is rarely a fast or tidy process to begin with. Compare that to how Egyptian hieroglyphics were finally cracked. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, contained the same decree written in 3 scripts, including ancient Greek, a language scholars could already read fluently. That single object gave researchers a direct key, allowing them to systematically match unknown hieroglyphic symbols against known Greek words and finally unlock the entire writing system within a few decades. The Indus Valley Civilization has never produced anything remotely equivalent. No bilingual inscriptions, no lengthy administrative archive comparable to what survived in Mesopotamia's clay tablet libraries. Just short, repeated sequences on small trade seals, giving researchers plenty of raw material to analyze statistically, but nothing resembling the kind of direct translation key that cracked every other major ancient writing system eventually broken by modern scholarship. Now let's talk about how it all ended, because this mystery is nearly as unresolved as the language itself. Mohenjo-daro, along with most of the wider Indus Valley Civilization, was abandoned sometime between roughly 1900 and 1700 BCE. The most immediately striking thing about this collapse is what archaeologists have not found at the site. There's no widespread evidence of a violent conquest, no mass battle destruction layer, no citywide burn layer consistent with a war of annihilation. A small number of skeletal remains have been found scattered at the site, but not in a pattern consistent with a single catastrophic massacre. Whatever happened here, it doesn't look like the sudden, violent ending you'd expect from an invading army wiping out a city. The leading theories instead point toward environmental and climatic pressure. Multiple lines of research suggest the wider region experienced a significant weakening of monsoon patterns during this period, part of a broader climatic shift, affecting a number of Bronze Age civilizations across a wide swath of Asia and the Middle East around the same general era. A weaker, less reliable monsoon would have directly threatened the agricultural surplus that a city this size depended on to feed its population, while some researchers also point to possible shifts in the course of the Indus River itself, potentially undermining the water access and irrigation systems the city's sophisticated infrastructure was originally built around. What's genuinely debated and unresolved is how fast this decline actually happened. Some researchers point to the site's preservation and argue the abandonment happened relatively quickly, perhaps within a generation or two. Once environmental conditions crossed some critical threshold the city could no longer absorb. Others argue for a slower, multi-generational decline, with population gradually dispersing outward towards smaller, more sustainable settlements, as conditions in the Indus Valley core became progressively less viable, a process closer to slow depopulation than sudden collapse. What almost all researchers agree on is that the ending wasn't isolated to Mohenjo-daro alone. By around 1800 BCE, most of the major cities across the entire Indus Valley Civilization show signs of significant decline or outright abandonment at roughly the same broad period, suggesting whatever forced people to leave wasn't a local problem, unique to one city, but a widespread pressure affecting an enormous, interconnected civilization all at once. This broader timing lines up with something researchers studying ancient climate have identified across an unusually wide stretch of the ancient world, a period of significant climatic disruption occurring in the centuries following roughly 2200 BCE, sometimes referred to by climate scientists as the 2 kiloyear event, associated with widespread aridification across a huge swath of the globe. This same general climatic window has been linked by various researchers to the decline of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, the collapse of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, and disruptions to early civilizations elsewhere in Asia, all within a roughly overlapping period. If the Indus Valley Civilization's decline connects to this same broader climatic disruption, it would mean Mohenjo-daro wasn't failing in isolation due to some unique local mistake. It would mean an entire generation of the world's first great urban civilizations, across multiple unconnected regions, were simultaneously pushed toward crisis by forces largely outside their control, each responding differently based on their own specific geography, resilience, and available adaptive strategies. That context matters, because it reframes Mohenjo-daro's disappearance from a story about one city's specific failure into something closer to a case study in how differently various Bronze Age societies handled a shared continent-spanning climatic shock. Egypt, with the reliable Nile flood cycle underpinning its agriculture, weathered this period with serious disruption, but ultimately recovered and continued as a recognizable civilization for millennia afterward. The Indus Valley cities, by contrast, appear to have responded to the same broad pressure by dispersing outward entirely, abandoning their great urban centers in favor of smaller, more distributed settlements better suited to a less predictable environment. A strategic retreat from urban complexity rather than a collapse into nothing. So here's where the honest picture of Mohenjo-daro actually sits, once you strip away the easy explanations. This was a city sophisticated enough to run covered sanitation infrastructure most contemporary civilizations couldn't match, coordinated enough to maintain identical brick standards across a territory spanning hundreds of miles, and organized enough to sustain roughly 40,000 people without a single monument glorifying an individual ruler, the way every comparable civilization of the era chose to do. And every explanation we have for how any of that actually worked is built entirely from physical inference, because the one direct source that could confirm or destroy every theory we currently hold, their own written words, remains completely locked behind a script nobody has broken in over 100 years of serious effort. The uncomfortable, honest truth is that Mohenjo-daro's people are simultaneously some of the best documented and least understood people in the ancient world. We know exactly how their houses were built, how their water moved through the streets, and roughly how their trade network functioned. And we know almost nothing about what they believed, who governed them, what they called themselves, or what they actually thought was happening to their world in the final years before they walked away from it for good. What's left today is a set of eroded brick mounds on the banks of the Indus River, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that receives a fraction of the global attention given to Egypt or Rome, despite representing a civilization that, in territorial scale, actually outsized both of them. Its name for itself is unknown. Its gods, if it had any in the form we'd recognize, are unknown. Its final years remain a debate between slow climate decline and something faster we still can't fully rule out. So we want to ask you directly, do you think the Indus script will ever actually be deciphered? Or is it possible we're looking at a system of meaning we've been trying to read as language for the wrong reason entirely? Leave your theory in the comments below. We read every one of them. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the kind sitting in plain sight, fully studied, and still somehow unknowable at its core, make sure you're subscribed, because next time, we're heading somewhere just as remarkable. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning the version of history you were handed.